Overcrowding in Lethbridge public schools has become a problem in recent years, but will the announcement of a new elementary school here in town change that? Here to talk about that and the recent school boundary revisions is Christine Light, board chair of the Lethbridge School Division. Christine, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeanette.
Absolutely. So I wanted to have you on today to discuss the recent changes that will affect so many students and so many families starting next school year, right? So in September. So the school board undertook this huge endeavor, a 2-year endeavor, in fact, that involved changing the catchment areas that would determine which neighborhoods would attend which schools, right? So
That's right.
as a result, this fall, hundreds of elementary, middle, and high school students will have to switch schools because of the new boundaries the school board put into place. So let's maybe begin with why it was necessary in the first place to change the boundary lines.
Of course. Well, as you said, the process started just over 2 years ago, and we have been having capacity pressure issues on the west side for quite some time. We've had them up until Coalbanks was given to us from the province, and what we found is the west side is developing so quickly that even when Coalbanks opened, it opened at capacity, and within its second year, it was over capacity. So it really didn't alleviate those pressures on the west side. So we've been advocating for a new school. That's been our number one capital priority project priority for the past 4 years. So what the division has decided to do 2 years ago is create boundary committees to really assess the three sectors of our city. And so we needed to address those growth pressures. So on the west side, we looked at boundaries, or the committee looked at boundaries. I shouldn't say we, because I wasn't on that committee. But they looked at the boundaries. They looked at population growth. They looked at trends. They did their research, and they really tried to find the best way to move students and fit students. Because what we want is we want kids to have space in their schools, really, so that they can learn the best that they can. And so we were looking at West Side capacity issues. We had a new school announced to us 4 years ago. The NDP government gave us funding for our new South Side Elementary School, which is opening this fall, Dr. Robert Claxton. And so we knew we needed to adjust the boundaries on the south side so we could have students attending the new school. And then we took the opportunity to look at the north side as well, and see if there were some boundaries that we could clean up there and just bring equity into our school populations on the north side.
For sure. So now, when I sat in on some of those board meetings, it sounded like there were some schools that were already at capacity, and I think there were 3 on the west side, right, including Coalbanks. So which schools were already at capacity?
Coalbanks, Proby, and Chinook are above capacity, so they're full. So what we have now is we have a school choice policy within our division. And so parents can apply to attend an out of catchment school, but because those schools are already above capacity, even with boundary changes, they're still above capacity. Those schools cannot accept new students.
Okay, and at when you're at capacity, what is it? It's 90% full or something, or 85% full. So that's amazing. That is a lot of student population. And like you said, the west side has been growing astronomically. Did it grow faster than what the city anticipated or than what the school division anticipated? Is that why suddenly all these changes happened?
I believe it did. Yes, we weren't anticipating such a fast growth. And I know in the last budget we were really hoping to get approval for a new elementary school last year, and that didn't happen. And so we've just continued to advocate. And so we needed to be creative with our boundaries.
Yeah, so speaking of boundaries, how did this committee come up with those boundaries? So I understand it was quite the undertaking, like mapping things out and everything. How did that go?
Well, it's definitely a long process. So for the first 2 years, the boundary committees, which were comprised of division office staff, trustees, administrators, they did their research on the growing trends of communities. They did their research on student population and just where families sat, and they really they drew maps and they redrew maps and they redrew maps and they redrew maps. And one thing that this process has taught me is how interconnected our city really is and the domino effect that one change can make on the rest of our community. And so you can have a fantastic idea for one school or one community, but as you see it fall out and affect 5 things after it, then you have to look at the long-term perspective of what that initial change can make. And so some of those things we could work with, and some of those things essentially said, no, we can't make this change. We need to look for a plan B, C, D, E, or F, right? And we just need to keep working.
Yeah.
So once they'd gone through all of those scenarios, multiple scenarios, they brought those scenarios back to the board. They updated the board during this 2-year period. We opened up the proposal. We made the proposal public on January the 12th, and then we opened the feedback loop, for the community and parents to give their ideas and their feedback on the proposed boundary change.
Yeah, I was just going to say, now, of course, you can't please everyone, and you found this out, obviously, through that parental feedback. So what kind of feedback were you hearing? I know on my end, being a reporter, I heard a lot, but I'm sure, I mean, you guys got to see, you had what, over 600 submissions, right? And you spent time going through everyone. We had over 600
submissions through the feedback loop. We also had personal emails and phone calls to the board as well. So we received those and we responded to those. And we had over 2,000 views on our website, just looking at the boundary presentation. So really fantastic public feedback and engagement. And we were thrilled to receive it. Some of the common perspectives we heard were the too brief of a period for feedback. Some people weren't impressed or satisfied with the 2 to 3 week time limit on the feedback loop, and I think just a lot of parents advocating for their kids, which is what parents are supposed to do. We love our schools, and especially our community schools. The community school just becomes embedded as part of the family and community fabric. And so definitely a grieving of families who are now being required to leave that community school and start afresh somewhere new. So of course, just hearing those concerns and those grieving stories, and I think that's the piece that was the hardest for the board to navigate through. Because we want kids to love schools. That's why we're trustees. We love students and we love schools, and we want them to feel settled and rooted and build community. And so we knew that the decision that we would make would affect families significantly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like some of the negative feedback that I had to do with busing. So kids who were at one point were eligible for busing suddenly had to switch to a school that was within that point that made them ineligible for busing. And what is it? Is it 2.6 kilometers or something? 2.4 kilometers. So yeah, and I think some of the concerns initially with the Copperwood students were, well, I don't want my 12-year-old walking up and down Whoop Up by themselves, or Métis. It's a busy road. Parents starting work early in the morning can't drop their kids off at work. And the great thing is you guys heard these concerns, and I know you made some revisions with that Copperwood area specifically, because at one point you had the boundary going right down Coalbanks Boulevard so that kids on one side of the road went to one school and kids on the other one went to the other school, right? So they're being separated from their friends, and you heard all kinds of stuff, right?
But you heard all kinds of stuff, yeah. And it was good. I mean, when you look at it on the map, it's easy to say, okay, well, that's logical. But then you hear from the families, and just that reminder of, well, you're actually slicing our community. And of course, we had to revisit that, and they advocated well for their community, and they were right. We didn't want to divide that community, so we changed the boundary for Copperwood.
Yeah, and from what I heard, all the Copperwood families were very, very satisfied with the changes that you made. And then there were some other changes that were made last minute. I spoke with some parents in the crossings who felt like it was they felt like it was a last minute change because I think the change came up on the Friday before that Monday board meeting. And so they were supposed to switch their child from Coal Banks to Mike Mountain Horse, and then all of a sudden to, was it Agnes
Nicholas
Davidson?
Sharon.
Nicholas Sharon,
And
rather.
Nicholas Sharon.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what did you do
Yeah.
to satisfy those parents? Has anything been done since then? I know there was like the school first choice, right?
Of course. Yeah. So the crossings community definitely felt ping-ponged back and forth a little bit, and understandably so. I think because they're in that, they'll be in the catchment for the new elementary school. There was a little more flexibility on the division side for where that community could sit. We initially had them attending Mike Mountain Horse, and what we had done was we put the crossings into Mike Mountain Horse, and we've moved Highlands down to Nicholas Sharon. And the Highlands community advocated and said, you know, Mike Mountain Horse is our community school. Don't take us from that school. So we listened to that community, and we redrew Highlands back into Mike Mountain Horse catchment, and then shifted the crossings down to Nicholas Sharon with busing, because they would be far enough for busing and it wouldn't be a safe walking route for busing. And I think in the initial proposal, they were satisfied with Mike Mountain Horse. But because the shift happened after the feedback loop, I believe that the community felt a little blindsided. And so in hindsight, yes, we definitely could have had better communication with that community. And so we heard the community, and what we've done is given them first choice for Mike Mountain Horse if they choose Mike Mountain Horse. Because it is under 2.4, I believe it's 1.7, they won't be able to access busing. But even if Mike Mountain Horse is over capacity, families who have students currently in the division will be guaranteed a spot, as well as any children coming up in that family will be guaranteed a spot in Mike.
Right. Well, hopefully that will be some satisfaction anyways. Let's talk for a quick minute about French immersion, because that was another huge thing. So anybody enrolled in French immersion on the west side is now going to have to go across the river, right, to the other side of town, basically, right?
That's right. Yes, they will. That was a difficult community to navigate this change with. I think 2/3 of the French immersion students that attend Nicholas Sharon are outside of Nicholas Sharon catchment. And so they currently are already bused to school. And then that leaves the remaining 1/3 that are within Nicholas Sharon catchment that walk to school. So this would be the part of the community that this is their neighborhood school. People have purchased homes to be close to their catchment school. So very difficult, hard family stories to implement a change with. And so again, I think the French community really didn't believe that the 2-3 week time period for the feedback loop was long enough, and they've really expressed that they wish that they were part of the communication, part of the boundary process from its inception. But when we look at what's best for the division, when we look at the capacity pressures on the west side, we knew we needed to move approximately 200 students from the west side. That wasn't an option, that had to be done. And moving our French immersion on the south side, Agnes Davidson, and converting it to a single track French immersion seemed to be the best move for the division as a whole.
Yeah, it's like you were saying, so many family stories, so many people being affected by this as well. What a huge job that the board had. Like you must have had the pressure of the world on your shoulders at times. Now,
Yeah.
This just recently, a huge announcement from the province funding for some new public schools in Alberta, including one here in Lethbridge. Congratulations on that, first of all. So tell me really quickly more about this. This was a long time coming, as you had mentioned, and it's going to be on the west side, right, in Gary Station?
Yes. We're very excited. We were absolutely thrilled to be given this school. We learned about the new school selection on March the 9th. So that news came about 2 weeks after our boundary board meeting. And yeah, so the new school will be in Gary Station. It's going to be a 900 capacity school. So initially when it's built, it will have capacity for 610 students. And then we will be able to expand out to 900 students if needed. So a welcomed addition to the west side.
And it's looking at opening at the earliest 2025, right?
That's right. Yeah, September of 2025. And so currently we have 4 elementary schools on the west side. 3 of them are south of Whoop Up Drive and 1 is north. That's Mike Mountain Horse. So I know that this new school will be a welcome addition to the north side of the west end.
Right. And then at what point can we see the groundbreaking or actually see some dirt turned for that school?
You know, that process, that takes about 2 years to get to that point. Right now, we start hiring architects to design the school, and we start looking at the companies that are going to build the school for us. So still a lot of legwork to do before we break ground, but a lot of work, but it'll go by fast, I'm sure.
For sure. Will this help with the overcrowding issues, or do you think there will be more by the time that comes around?
That's the magic question.
Yeah.
I'm really hoping it does help. We are anticipating our elementary schools on the west side being back at or above capacity by the time the new school opens. But we were hopeful in applying for a 900 student school. That will be the largest elementary school, and that was the wisest and most prudent way to go. And so I'm hoping that we will have lots of room in our classes for our students for some years to come.
Yeah, I hope so too. All the best of luck with that. Christine Light, Chair of the Lethbridge School Division, thank you so much for all the information. I know there's a lot of it, and thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Jeanette. It was great to be here.
Absolutely. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.